Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist. Another one of those heads up videos that might be worth some people being aware of depending on their situation. So what triggered this was I was having a short chat with my American buddy here yesterday, and he was expressing some frustrations and so I won't go into too many specifics about his situation, but some people sometimes observe that living in Japan is like living in the future, and usually what they're referring to is some sort of technology that we have here that is cool, you know, Japanese toilets or something. However, as we've talked about on previous videos, socially and as far as relationships between people, it can feel like living in the 1950s. So I'm really old, so my mother is really old, right? And sometimes when I'm talking to her about things that exist here as far as relationships and behaviours and things, she'll say, oh, that's what it was like in the 50s. So she'll recognise different aspects of Japanese life now as being what she experienced back in the 1950s, right? So specifically what we're talking about this time is relationships between partners. So if you have a Japanese wife or a Japanese husband or a Japanese girlfriend or Japanese boyfriend, you might come across one of these things. So there are exceptions to this, as always with these sort of videos. There are exceptions, but it's very common for Japanese people to live at home with their parents until they get married or until they get in a relationship, move out in a relationship, usually to get married. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that. There's some people who move away to go to university or move away to go to work somewhere, or, you know, move in with friends somewhere. Obviously that does exist, but it's still very, very common for girls and guys to stay at home with their parents until they get married. And we know people that are in their 30s, 40s. We know people that are in their 40s that haven't got married yet, still live with their parents. So it's really, really common. So what that means is, for our American friend, his wife lived at home with her parents until they got married, and then they moved in together, and then they lived together, and he's paid the bills. Now that means that she has never experienced paying the bills, because when she lived at home, her parents paid the bills, and now she lives with her husband pays the bills. And she has a part-time job, but he was saying that it's more like a hobby, is what he said, because it's sort of more craft than part-time job, and she doesn't make very much money from it. So she spends a fair bit of time doing it, but doesn't really make any money from it, which means that he's 100% responsible for the bills. And I can relate to him, because when the bills arrive at our house, some of you guys that have been with us a while would be familiar with the notorious corkboard. The corkboard is where all the bills go, and quite often I'll come home from work and there'll be another bill on the corkboard that wasn't there when I left to go to work, right? And that's automatically what happens to all the bills. They just get pinned on the corkboard. And in our case, the lady of the house does actually work part-time, but as with a lot of Japanese ladies, they have these part-time jobs that are sort of because they want to do them and to get a little bit of money that they use to do other things with. They don't sort of consider that they might want to pay one of those bills, right? Now there's exceptions to this. We also know ladies, I know single mothers here that pay all the bills. There's also ladies that I know here that work full-time. We've got neighbours. We've got one neighbour. She seems to work every day. So at least 6 days a week. We see her go off to work in the morning and come back late at night, and she's got a fairly sort of a minimum paying job, and she works really hard. So she's doing it to help pay bills, no doubt. And we got family members that are the same as well. But we have many, many more examples of ladies who either don't work at all, or they just work part-time because it's something that they want to do for a bit of fun and hang out with some other ladies doing something and getting a little bit of money. And in Japan it's sort of still normal, because because those traditional style, like 1950s style relationships where the husband goes and gets the money and comes home, pays the bills, and the lady runs the house, is still the most common thing here. Whoops, sorry. Sorry, your camera moved. So that is still the most common. So even though there are exceptions to this now, and a lot of ladies do, are professional and have their own professions and things, that is still sort of probably the most common relationship that we see, is where the husband pays the bills. And there's a thing out there people talk about sometimes about how the Japanese husbands come home and give the money to the wife, and the wife gives them a little bit of spending money, and the wife controls the money. It's sort of a little bit like that sometimes, because the traditional role in Japan for the wife is to run the household. So that is common too, that the husband's money pays the bills, but the wife actually physically pays the bills and manages the money and gives him a little bit of spending money, sort of thing. So you do hear about that a lot on the internet. It sort of does exist, but I can't think of too many people who actually do live like that. But the husband going to work and earning the money, that's really common. So the point of this video is, if you find yourself in a relationship with a Japanese lady, there's a good chance that's what it'll be like. Not always. I mean, we know a lady who's a doctor. Obviously, she works full time. We know lots of professional ladies here as well, but we know way more that fit into that category of either not working at all or just working a little bit part-time just because they want to, and they get a little bit of money that they used to spend. My money's my money. In our case, my money's our money, and her money's her money. And I never see it. And I mean, the other side of the coin is, of course, that the ladies that do live like that here do usually see it that taking care of the household chores and doing all the work around the house and the grocery shopping and the cooking and cleaning, and they still see it as that's their role too, right? Same as back in the 1950s, where the ladies are housewife. She's a housewife, so that's all her job, right? So there's still ladies that live like that as well. So there's that. There's also the other side of the coin that I should mention, that there are a lot of men, as mentioned at the start of the video, there are a lot of men too who live at home with their parents until they get married, and that means that those guys haven't experienced living alone and having to do the cooking and cleaning and taking care of the house, right? So they haven't experienced doing that themselves, and so you imagine, being married to a guy like that, his mother did all the cooking and cleaning and washing his clothes, and then he's moved out and he's moved in with his wife, so now he expects her to do all the cooking and cleaning and washing his clothes, right? So, we know a lot of relationships like that where the wife is more like the mother. The relationship between the husband and the wife, it's more like it's his mother, because basically she's filling the role that his mother used to fill, taking care of him. And we know one lady who complains that her husband, he goes to work Monday to Friday and he comes home at night and does his, this typical Japanese working man thing. But on the weekends, apparently he spends all weekend playing video games. That's all he does. So, he's still a child, really, because, that's it. His whole life has been living at home with his parents, and now he's got married. We actually know one sad story where the lady got married. She's about mid-20s, and she met this guy, and it was exactly that classic situation where she lived at home with her parents, he lived at home with his parents, and they got married and they moved in together. They lasted 1 year, and usually Japanese people will, if they're unhappily married, will still stay together. That's usually what they'll endure. They'll endure. They'll gaman suru. They'll endure, and they'll stay together forever, even if they're not happy. And they sort of think that's sort of normal. Whereas in this case, these guys broke up. They were together for 1 year, and they broke up. And I said to her, oh, that's sad. I asked her really gently, sort of, what happened, And she said, oh, it was about money. It was about money. And so you can imagine, you know, he's never lived away from home, she's never lived away from home. They both live with their parents, then suddenly they're living together. And I know for a fact she's not really into working. She doesn't like working very much. She only works a little bit, but she does enjoy a holiday. She likes going over to Seoul, over to Korea for the weekend. She does that fairly regularly. So I suspect that in her case, she probably spent any money she earned, which meant he was in that situation where he had to pay the bills, which would have been new to him because he'd been living home with his parents where, you know, his parents would have paid the bills. He might have contributed, but suddenly he found himself in a situation where he was paying all the bills and she wasn't paying any, I'm guessing, because her lifestyle, you know, she works bare minimum, doesn't like working very much. She does work a little bit, but probably spends more than she earns, which would be really common here, and it just didn't work, so they broke up. But that's rare. Usually here they just accept it. You know, the ladies will complain about their husbands, but they just accept it and they just stick with it. Divorce is still reasonably rare here. We know a couple of exceptions, but yeah, it's pretty rare. Usually the ladies will just put up with it. Oh, it's just because they think it's normal, right? Same as in the 50s, where people thought that this was just normal gender roles, that, you know, the husband did this and the wife did that, and that was normal. So that's usually how they see it here. So the ladies will complain about their husbands, but they sort of accept that their husband's behaviour is normal here, and the husbands complain about their wives, but they accept that that's normal here too. So that's all good, isn't it? The reason for this video is after talking to the buddy yesterday, I was thinking, yeah, you know, you got to be aware of this. If you get yourself in a relationship with a Japanese person, it could well be nothing like I've described. You know, we know those professional ladies that work full time. We know good guys. I know guys, I know one in particular who cooks regularly, and he's quite a good cook. So they exist as well. So there are exceptions. As with all these videos, there's always exceptions. So, you know, there are ladies that work professionally and pay all their own bills, and you know, there are guys here that take care of the housework and do all that as well. They do exist, but probably your chances of getting one would probably be really remote. You know, they're not real common. You just sort of got to, if you find yourself one of these relationships, you sort of got to look at the positive side. On the upside, you know, that's the way to look at it. You know, it does get a little bit frustrating sometimes. You can feel a bit, either relationship, you can feel a bit taken for granted, right? You know, if you've got a Japanese husband and he just expects you to do all the housework and he doesn't do anything, you can feel a bit taken for granted probably. And if you've got a Japanese wife who just hands you all the bills and expects you to pay them, and, you know, maybe has a part-time job, but you never see any of the money. That's my case. I've never seen any money come from anywhere except where I've got it from. So it's really normal here. So anyway, that's it. That's the heads up. That's the heads up. So yeah, it's like living in the 1950s. It's really interesting. You know, you talk to someone who's 80, 90 years old from outside Japan, you know, like my mother, and she'll go, oh yes, yeah, that's what it was like in the 50s. You're living in the 50s there, which is sort of what it feels like often. There's often things, we've talked about different things over the years, you know, psychology or lack of psychology and parenting and all sorts of things like that really is similar to what it was like back in the 50s, you know. So anyway, that's enough of that. Hopefully that's a heads up. My thinking is with these videos is, if people have heard about these things before they experience them, it can make it a bit easier. You know, if you experience one of these things for the first time, the other thing is too, what is that person, the person that you're having a relationship with, what is about them that is making this situation the way it is, and what is it about what's normal in Japan and what's a normal thing in Japan? Because, you know, quite often people find themselves in relationships and think, what's wrong with this person? And it's really nothing wrong with that person. It's just that in Japan, what they're doing and the way they're thinking is normal. And so if you're aware of these things before you find yourself dealing with it, then it can help you a bit. You go, oh, I've heard about this. All right, okay, I've heard this exists. So she's got this part-time job and she comes home and I pay the bills, or or he comes home from work and puts his feet up and plays video games and doesn't help with the kids and doesn't help with the house and doesn't do anything. I've heard about this. This is quite common in Japan, apparently. It makes it a little bit easier to deal with if you've heard about it and you know that it exists, you know. So, anyway, that's more than enough of that. More of it will be coming on similar topics, no doubt, in the future. Everybody's sitting there at that traffic light. We're all looking at their phones. You'll hear more about that in the future too. More videos coming soon.